Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. I am Marcel and I finally have the opportunity to tell you all about a brilliant race week. Our highlight today includes the Formula 4 UAE opener with all the future F1 stars going at it, but we also have the Formula Regional Middle Eastern Championship as well as the season opener for Formula E to talk about. So let's not waste any more time and let's get going. We are going to begin with what I said is my highlight, so the F4 UAE opener around Yas Marina. And as expected, the general field was led by the Prema Run Mumbai Falcons cars. So we had Freddie Slater, Keen Nakamura Berta, Alex Powell, Dorian Parr, Dion Gauda and Rashid Al-Daheri, 6 young and very promising drivers all going up against each other in the best car on the grid. Thus it was quite of an easy pick for the best race of the week really. Although the weekend started a lot slower than expected with an almost overly civilized first race, barely any overtakes, no safety car. Definitely not the sort of thing you'd expect with a bunch of karting graduates going up against each other, a lot of them in their first ever car race as well. So yeah, that was quite a good look, pure motor racing all around. Out of the Prema boys, Freddie Slater impressed most in my opinion. He finally secured his first F4 win, but he also is one of only 2 guys to stand on the podium twice, and he was by far the most successful guy carving his way through the field in the reverse grid second race. Thus he is easily my MVP of the weekend. A somewhat close runner-up is probably Keen Nakamura Berta, who also finally got his first at least meaningful win. I can't even remember if he won in the F4 Southeast Asian series, but let's be real, even if he did, that doesn't really mean a whole lot, unfortunately. Sorry, Dorian Parr. Talking about her, she was also a very prominent figure in the midfield, scoring points, I believe, in all races at the very... Oh no, actually in the reverse grid she didn't, but at the very least competing for points in all the races. Definitely making use of her car, not the typical female competitor performance where they are like, 10, 15 positions behind their male teammates. Not at all. She was up there with, I'd say, about Al-Daheri in some capacity, so that was a very good round from her as well. Alex Powell was a front runner, but not quite able to match Slater and Nakamura Berta over race distance, so there's maybe a tiny bit of catching up to do. And then last but not least, we have Dion Gauda, who had a great start, but unfortunately he did get wrecked twice in the second and the third race. Though, to be fair, in the second race maybe he wrecked himself, it wasn't on camera. In the third race he got absolutely murdered, so yeah, not much to say about him. The pace was clearly there. Just a quick shout out to Yas Racing. Well, I'm not entirely sure if the Racing Academy is actually run by Prema or not. Normally the Yas Racing Academy branded cars are operated by Prema in Europe. I don't know whether or not that's the case here. I haven't read anything about it, but the performance would sort of suggest that maybe, as Keanu Al-Azari was also able to step onto the podium twice with a P2 in both the first and the third race, and therefore a really notable performance. High Tech was sort of a mixed bag, where the car was definitely quick and Deegan Fairclough did a really good job, was a front runner in most races, and yeah, he's easily going to be one of the top players in the British F4 this season. Joining him was Gabriel Stilp, who had a bit of a troubled run. The pace was clearly there, again just like in his British campaign last year, but he did get into an incident. He also was the guy who I just said murdered Gauda once in one of the races, so there is some work to be done, and unfortunately both Murray and Siworthan were nowhere to be found. Then again, for Siworthan at least, it was his first ever F4 race, so we can cut him some slack. He was pretty good in the Ginetta Juniors last year, so I do expect him to improve. PHM is a really odd case with Nikita Bedrin, who is by all accounts overqualified for this series. He should be dominating the field and just clearly does not have the machinery to do so. That's quite unfortunate. He at least managed to win the reverse grid race after a long time of waiting behind Jack Beaton. But yeah, PHM just did not provide him with a package to fight at all, clearly, and therefore his rookie teammates were absolutely nowhere to be found. A almost similar story for Race GP, unfortunately. Although I have to say, I thought Rafael Narak was a bit underrated last year in the Italian F4, and this sort of performance does change my mind, because he did get convincingly beat by Caranta and Enzo Ye, so two people in their first ever car race as well. Enzo Ye maybe debuted before, I think, but Caranta certainly didn't. So either way, not a great look, but the car itself also just didn't seem to have the capacity to fight for anything more than the lower end of the points. AGI Sport was again just a very weird and not super competitive looking package, although Jack Beaton was for the longest time leading the reverse grid second race. So he did actually end up with a very good result, even though he couldn't actually convert the lead into a win. His teammates though were nowhere to be found. And Santalog Racing also just didn't really have the capacity to shine. David, also a very promising karting graduate, couldn't do anything really. He was stuck deep down the midfield, but was still largely beating his teammates. The only real surprise here is actually Matteo Quintarelli, who I didn't really rate at all, and he overperformed big time. He also got a really good result in the reverse grid, and actually scored in the non-reverse grid race in one of them as well. So he actually looks like a bit of a team leader, at least during this round. Sure, maybe it's his home track. That might be a thing that just sort of stacked the odds in his favor, but I still wanted to point it out as a surprisingly good performance. In the tier above, in the Formula Regional Middle Eastern Championship, the racing was really all about Race GP versus the Premier Run Mumbai Falcons, with some Taylor Barnard just in the mix because he's Taylor Barnard and also a little overqualified for the series. So it was quite an interesting spectacle all around, although just like in the F4 series, the first race, barely anything happened. I just want to point this out, 2 out of 2, that's very rare and unusual. But anyway, RSGP was probably the best team pound for pound, impressing with both Tuka Tapanen and Zachary David scoring P2s during their campaign. In particular, Tapanen in the first race actually beating a very experienced teammate Martinius Stenson in the same car was very impressive, although over the other races Stenson quickly developed into the favourite for the series we sort of expect him to be, or rather until all the F3 drivers leave the series to do their pre-season testing. So obviously he won't actually win the championship. Nonetheless, the rest of the event was largely about Barnard versus Stenson. That was a bit of a theme, which eventually saw a very, very spicy overtake in race 3 with Stenson going slightly off the track apparently all the way around Barnard to take the lead. I'm gonna hopefully put the move on screen right now. But yeah, unfortunately, it was deemed slightly illegal, and he got dumped back down to P2 afterwards with a penalty. Nonetheless, his pace in that race 3 was really outstanding, and he managed to get Barnard and the rest by over 3 seconds, I believe. So really, really stunning drive. Now, speaking about him, Barnard really the second best driver, clear cut in the series, or rather, for my money, actually the best, but unfortunately in nowhere near the best machinery. Really struggling to do much of anything in that PHM. Really reminds me of Bedrin in that sense in the F4 series. But I'm saying he's really struggling to do much of anything, and he still won both of the non-reverse grid races. So that is a bit of a weird contradiction. Why do I say this? Now, first of all, he was entirely stuck in the reverse grid race 2. He couldn't make any progress. In fact, he actually lost a couple positions, if I remember correctly. So that's an obvious problem. And then in that third race in particular, you could just see how big the pace advantage between Stenson and Barnard is. So he could do very good quali laps, but in the race, he didn't have anything in that race. So yeah, just a bit unfortunate to watch, and also explains why Barnard's teammates were really nowhere to be found. Although, quick shout out Intra Puvazak, I can't pronounce his name for the life of me, the quite promising Thai driver. I do like him. Bit of a weird career path he's been taking, but yeah, he's been doing well in the car as well. Now, let's talk about the big team, the obvious one with all the juniors in, Mumbai Falcons / Prema once again, and it was very good, but also very chaotic. So we had Arvid Lindblad, who in both the regular grid races struggled a bit for pace overall and couldn't quite match all of his teammates and everything, but he actually ended up winning the reverse grid race from the reverse pole. So all of that was really great to watch, and so I don't know what happened in those quali sessions. I think maybe it was largely down to the actual quali performance. Although his race pace was also lacking, at least in that third one. So it's, I don't know, very weird one, but generally promising. In the same vein, we have Yugo Chukwu, who again had some very good results and was also absent with some poor performances in the first race and everything. So I don't know, I don't really know what to make of these. I'm really looking forward to the next round to see how this actually all shakes out. The guy who we sort of thought we knew where he's at, Rafael Camara, did unfortunately disappoint big time in my opinion. I had him down as he should at least be fighting Barnard and Stenshorn, and he should be at least a comfortable podium contender in every race, and he absolutely wasn't. He wasn't once really, and so he was also classic Camara unlucky, I'll add that. He got taken out in the second race in quite shocking fashion by Wharton, and he also got taken out in the third race, or at least he got involved in an incident. It's a bit unclear what happened for me, but yeah, either way, classic Camara, unlucky run, but also just not the raw pace I had, hoped for. So not quite what we wanted maybe. And then last but not least, we have the aforementioned Wharton, who actually his pace was surprisingly good. I have to say, he was matching Tappanen. They had a few really good battles. So in that sense, he actually overperformed in terms of my expectations. Unfortunately though, as he did also massively outbrake himself, overshot a corner trying to overtake Tappanen and wrecked his teammate Camara in the process. So very, very naughty, and that can't happen again this season. That would be a disaster really. Anyway, lots of really good signs all around. One last special shout out I have to say for Abkasava, again a name I cannot pronounce here. Can't mispronounce it if you don't know how I pronounce, am I right? Either way, he was one of those just really super back market types in F4, just no signs of anything really. So I thought, okay, he must have money. He's going to be one of those Machio type characters in the Formula Regional now. And shockingly, he wasn't. He was actually the best of his team and scored points twice and was even competing for a podium in the reverse grid. I don't know what's happening. Yeah, so shout out to Abkasava, and I hope that's a trend and not just a one-off. If you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave a like on the video. It really helps a lot. Last but not least, we have the Formula E season opener in Mexico City, and it was a surprisingly bad race, I have to say. I was really waiting for this one. I was hoping to be all excited and tell you all about the fantastic action and chaos and try to convince you all to watch Formula E. And it was probably the most boring FE race I've watched in my life, unfortunately. Nonetheless, the results were very interesting. We had Pascal Wehrlein once again starting the season really hot, and almost as much as you can do that in Formula E, I'd say he dominated this race. It was a very, very strong performance. He only really had three main competitors going up against him, namely Sebastian Buemi, Nick Cassidy and Maxi Günther, who finished in this order in the top four, and they were a fair bit ahead of the rest of the grid. Namely, this also means P5 Mitch Evans lacked a lot of pace compared to Cassidy. That was maybe one of those interesting developments. Obviously, I talked a bit about the Jaguar inter-team duel in my last video. And yeah, so far I've been spot on here. Cassidy does seem to have the upper hand, and actually by more than I thought. Although obviously it's one race, a bit early to go too deep into this. Similar fashion for the Porsche duel with Da Costa, who not only qualied way behind teammate Wehrlein, but also binned it quite early on with a very ambitious move on Nico Müller, I believe it was. But yeah, so not the showing Porsche expected from Da Costa after pulling him from all the sports car efforts to focus on Formula E. I'm sure that is a bit of a disappointment for everybody involved. Yeah, what else really is there? There's our rookie watch, the only rookie of the season, Daruvula, had a, I don't want to say shocking opener, because we know these cars are super different from anything else he's ever driven. But yeah, it was still terrible. While Günther had like pace to fight for a podium, he was almost last to last for most of the race. But then again, first race, he gets a break, I think, for this one. And then the other interesting inter-team duel to watch out for, in my opinion, was the McLaren one with Jake Hughes versus Sam Bird. And it was actually even less close than I expected, at least for this one outing. Bird did get clapped a little bit by Hughes. He was quite considerably behind. Hughes was fighting well within the points, while Bird was nowhere near scoring really, or although I think he was down in like only P12, it never felt like he really had the opportunity to go forward because nobody in this race was moving forward. So yeah, bit of a disappointing performance considering most of the other teammates were running really close together. The only other exception from this is then Robin Freins. While teammate Buemi managed to secure P2, he unfortunately also put it into a wall pretty early on after qualifying far down the order, so a bit of a disappointing performance after returning to Envision. Anyway, I think this just about sums up all the racing action of the week, at least in the single-seaters. There will be a sports car edition of Race Week Review later in the week. You can leave me all your thoughts about the racing action we've watched down in the comments to get a little discussion going. And otherwise, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next week.